The arena was settling into that familiar, restless hum that occurs when a main event drags on just a few minutes too long. You could feel the energy in the building beginning to fray, the audience checking their phones or glancing at the exits, mentally preparing for the traffic jam home. The air was thick with a stale predictability, the kind that settles over a stadium when the outcome feels predetermined and the drama has been manufactured rather than earned. Inside the ring, the competitors were going through the motions, trading holds that lacked bite, their exhaustion mirroring the apathy growing in the stands. Even the commentary team seemed to be running on autopilot, their voices dipping into that rhythmic, conversational drone used to fill dead air. It was a Tuesday night atmosphere on a premium stage, a moment where the spectacle of the WWE felt routine, safe, and entirely under control. Then, the shift happened, but it wasn't an explosion of pyrotechnics or a screech of guitar feedback. It was a technical glitch, or at least that is what it felt like in the stillness of the moment. The massive LED boards ringing the stadium didn't flash a logo, they simply died. The house lights didn't dim theatrically, they cut out completely, plunging 20,000 people into a sudden, suffocating darkness. For 3 agonizing seconds, there was no sound, no music, no production cues, just the confused murmur of a crowd stripped of its visual anchor. It wasn't the excitement of a surprise. It was the genuine primal unease of a system failure. The darkness held for a beat longer than was comfortable, transforming the boredom into a palpable tension that tightened chests and silenced the murmurs. Something was wrong, and the silence that followed was heavier than any cheer could ever be. When the single spotlight finally snapped on, it didn't hit the stage or the ramp. It pierced the gloom to strike the barricade near the timekeeper's area, illuminating a figure standing in the crowd, not apart from them.
Wow.
There was no iconic steampunk attire, no grandiose coat, and no dyed orange hair flaring under the lights. The figure was dressed in stark, nondescript street clothes, dark hoodie pulled low, canvas tactical pants, and boots that looked worn from travel, not polished for TV. The camera operator scrambled, the lens shaking as it tried to find focus in the sudden light, creating a frantic Verret feel that broke the fourth wall of the broadcast. As the figure slowly vaulted the barricade, the hood was pulled back, revealing a face the world knew, but an expression they did not recognize. It was Becky Lynch, yet she looked stripped of the man. There was no smile, no pandering to the hard camera, and no pause to soak in the adulation. Her eyes were hollowed out, focused on something invisible in the middle of the ring, her movement possessing a predatory fluidity that felt dangerous rather than performative. The crowd reaction was a delayed, disjointed wave of noise confusion wrestling with recognition. It wasn't the unified pop of a returning hero. It was a chaotic mix of gasps, screams, and hushed questions rippling through the stands. They weren't cheering for a catchphrase. They were reacting to a ghost walking back into the machine. She moved with a frightening lack of urgency, ignoring the referees who were waving their arms in confusion. This wasn't a scripted interruption. It felt like an invasion, a violation of the show's format by someone who no longer cared about the rules of the game she had once mastered. The commentary table was in disarray, with headsets muted and papers shuffled in a panic that the microphones picked up despite the audio cut. When the feed returned, the voices of the announcers were stripped of their usual broadcast polish, replaced by a genuine, stammering disbelief. They didn't shout her name in triumph, whispered it in concern, questioning security protocols rather than hyping the moment. Inside the ring, the action had ceased entirely. The two competitors stood frozen, their storyline forgotten, staring at the intruder who had just slid under the bottom rope. Becky stood up, and the silence she commanded was deafening. She didn't ask for a microphone. She didn't taunt the crowd. She simply walked to the center of the canvas and looked at the champion, her gaze heavy with a burden that felt centuries old. Without a single word spoken, the violence that erupted was sudden and uncomfortable. It wasn't a wrestling move. It was a tackle of pure frustration, a grounding of the champion that looked less like a spot and more like a street fight. The strikes were sloppy, desperate, and terrifyingly real, devoid of the theatrical spacing usually seen on television. The referee didn't count a pin. He backed away in fear. When security finally rushed the ring, Becky didn't fight them off with superhero strength. She simply stopped, raised her hands in a surrender that felt like a mockery, and stared into the hard camera. The lens zoomed in on her face, catching a sheen of sweat and a slight tremble in her lip. She looked directly at the viewer at home, her eyes communicating a chilling message. The entertainment is over. She rolled out of the ring and exited through the crowd, leaving a shattered main event in her wake. The feed cut abruptly to backstage, bypassing the usual replays and sponsor graphics. Adding to the chaotic, unpolished feel of the night, the camera followed a shaky path through the gorilla position, catching glimpses of producers shouting into headsets and executives scrambling with phones pressed to their ears. This wasn't the sanitized backstage skits usually presented. This was the raw, uncomfortably lit reality of a production in collapse. Wrestlers who were supposed to be in character were seen breaking kayfabe, whispering in huddled groups, their faces marked by genuine shock. The air in the hallway was thick with the kind of tension that usually precedes a firing or a lawsuit, not a storyline progression. We saw the blurred figure of Seth Rollins pacing near a loading dock, his back to the camera, head in his hands, portraying a husband who was just as blindsided as the fans. Reporters were being held back by security, their microphones thrust toward empty doorways, desperate for a soundbite that would explain the intrusion. The locker room door for the women's division was shut tight, but the audio picked up muffled shouting from inside, voices raised in anger and confusion. It painted a picture of a hierarchy disrupted, of a locker room that felt unsafe because the unspoken contract of trust had been violated. Becky wasn't seen in these shots. She was a phantom that had struck and vanished, leaving the infrastructure of the company to tremble. The instability felt contagious, seeping through the screen. It made the viewer feel like an intruder, witnessing a corporate meltdown rather than a scripted drama. The blurred lines between reality and fiction were erased completely, leaving only the stark, uncomfortable aftermath of a return that came with no warning and no joy. As the broadcast faded to black, the lingering feeling was not excitement for the next week, but a profound sense of unease. Returns in professional wrestling are designed to be cathartic. They are dopamine hits, meant to sell tickets and merchandise. This was different. This was a deconstruction of the very concept of the surprise return. It forced the audience to confront the human cost behind the character, the toll that years of being the man takes on a person's psyche. Becky Lynch didn't come back to reclaim a title. She came back to dismantle the memory of who she was. The silence she left behind was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the arena and the living rooms of millions watching around the world. We are left wondering not about match cards or rivalries, but about the motive of a woman who has achieved everything yet seems to have lost herself. The script has been burned. The moment wasn't a celebration, it was a warning shot. By stripping away the music, the pyro, and the pageantry, the return highlighted the artifice of everything else we had seen that night. It was a mirror held up to the industry, reflecting a harsh, unglamorous truth. The viewer is left paralyzed, staring at a black screen, realizing that the story isn't about winning a championship anymore, it is about survival. And for the first time in years, we don't know who is going to win, or if winning is even possible in a game that has suddenly, violently, become real. The question isn't what Becky Lynch will do next. The question is, can the WWE survive what she has become?